Now, CGTN Africa's Beatrice Marshall has discussed China's efforts to control the outbreak in an interview with Kenya's KBC Radio. And she joins Richard now in our Nairobi studio. Richard, it's over to the two of you.
Well, that's right. Thanks a lot. CGTN Africa anchor Beatrice Marshall highlighted China's efforts to control the coronavirus outbreak and the role the media should play in enabling public outreach measures to dispel any misinformation. She now joins us live in our Nairobi studios. Beatrice, I want to thank you for taking time out to join us here on The Link. Let me begin by asking you, what are the misconceptions out there about the way China has been handling the coronavirus outbreak?
Well, Richard, first of all, we have to understand that this is a new strain of a virus. So naturally, it is taking time for people to understand exactly what it is. And particularly on the African continent, people are still worried because it's coming on against the background of the Ebola virus that hit the continent, parts of West Africa in 2014. And second of all, this is the age of social media. So there are a lot of unconfirmed reports that tend to get out there. There is a question that I was asked this morning while I was talking about dispelling the misconceptions that are abounding, and people are wondering whether it's the true picture, what they're seeing coming out of China, the numbers that are coming out of the fatalities, whether there is more than meets the eye. And I'm no medical expert, but I was pointing out that when you look at the COVID-19 virus, the fatality rate is about 2.2%. And yes, it is an epidemic. It is a global epidemic now. It is worrisome. But if you look at that in comparison with other viruses, for instance, the H1N1 in 2009, where there were 1.6 million, 332, 1.6 million, over 1.6 million cases confirmed and 284,500 deaths. About the fatality rate was about 17.40%, 17.40%, compared to the 2% of the COVID-19 virus. When you make those comparisons, you realize that the quick response that the Chinese government has undertaken in containing the COVID-19 virus has been effective, and probably that is why people are asking, are we seeing the real picture? That's the sort of information that we want to get out there to the public, that yes, this is an epidemic, but it is now effectively under control. The Chinese government has it under control. The response has been fast, the response has been effective, and that is what we're seeing on the ground.
All right, Beatrice, let's talk suggestions here. From your perspective, how can the media improve the coverage of the COVID-19 to help in containing the outbreak?
We live in a global village now, Richard. The world is a global village. When you look at the flights, for instance, between China and Africa over the last 10 years, it has grown by 600%, and those are facts from the African Union. So you can imagine how the numbers of people that are flying, traveling, here and there in between China and Africa over the last 10 years has grown exponentially. So we are in a global village. We also have to remember that a virus is not just confined to one community, not confined to one people. We look at ourselves in Africa and we say we had the Ebola virus. That was not a virus only for Africa. If you are in South Africa, you're watching the Ebola virus unveil in parts of West Africa in the same way as people in Europe, people in China, people in America were viewing the unfolding scenario. So we have to remember that this is a time for facts. It is not a time for fear. This is a time for scientific facts. We need to hear what the World Health Organization has to say. We need to research properly as journalists. We need to hear from what is going on the ground. We need to get our authoritative reports from people who have the authority to say that. And I'm gratified to see what is happening on the African continent, because when you look at how the states, the African nations have been unveiling the measures they are putting in place to fight the outbreak of the coronavirus, it has really been senior government officials, which has, I think, assisted a lot in dispelling any notions to the African population that there is more than meets the eye.
All right, Beatrice, my final question before I let you go. Let's talk business, economy, trade. What has been the economic impact of the coronavirus outbreak, especially for businesses in Africa?
Well, Richard, I posed this question to the Executive Secretary for the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Vera Songwe, during the last African Union Summit, which just ended last week. And she said China's growth has been pulling Africa with it. If China's growth slows, Africa's growth will slow, because China is Africa's largest trade partner. We also have to understand that Africa's tourism has also very much depended on Chinese tourists over the last few years. There are over 1.5 million tourists that visit Africa annually now from China, mainly visiting Egypt, Kenya, Morocco, Tunisia, South Africa, Mauritius, Zimbabwe, just to name a few countries. There are also over 10,000 Chinese enterprises that operate in Africa. But because we are witnessing the response, and we are seeing that for the last 11 consecutive days, the rate of the epidemic has largely slowed inside China. We are optimistic on the continent, of course, and African businesses are optimistic on the continent that in the not too distant future, it will be business as usual. I want to point out also, Richard, that you know, Africa's e-platforms are pretty much operating as business as usual. We've got the Alibaba, which has been pushing into the African market, and you know, they did open a digital trade center in Rwanda and open another platform in Ethiopia. You know, online platforms such as using Alipay, using Kilimall, for instance, where business people get their goods from China and shop online. That business is still open. What we might see a slowdown might just be, you know, in terms of cargo. Slowing down slightly coming into the continent because of the China-Africa trade. But in the not too distant future, in the next few weeks, we hopefully will see business resuming as usual.
All right, Beatrice Marshall, thank you so much for your insights. Let's leave it there for now. That was our Africa anchor, Beatrice Marshall, breaking it down for us. Quite an important discussion there, because the media has a critical role in ensuring only the correct and relevant information is shared.